Welcome back to Demystifysci. I'm Shiloh.
I'm Anastasia.
This is the podcast where we search for the theories and ideas that are going to change the world. And today we are back at it with economics. And we've explored traditional economic theories in the past, particularly through the lens of modern monetary theory. We're going to be expanding that to some more classical approaches to economics very soon. But today we're going far outside the box and we are thinking about blockchain money. And really thinking about what the heck money is, because it is at the center of all these financial structures, but it's never defined. It's kind of like the word life in biology. It's like it has all these characteristics, but lots of them are circular. And what are we actually dealing with here? So, to lead us through that discussion is an expert in Bitcoin, of all things. Now, hold on for a second before you run away because one of your friends got scammed on a Bitcoin exchange or something like that. We also have been quite skeptical of all of these digital currencies. We kind of lump them together in our minds. We've heard the horror stories. But our guest today, Brandon Quittem, makes a pretty compelling case that the philosophy underpinning Bitcoin and the project itself is bigger than any one particular approach to blockchain technology because, in some sense, it recapitulates processes that have been successful in nature to date. And it provides an alternative to the crumbling institutional structures in the financial world that we're all very skeptical and scared of at the moment, anyways. It's also the first time that anyone has explained blockchain and Bitcoin in a way that completely made sense to me. So, this is one that you don't want to miss.
If you like what we do at the podcast, consider coming over to patreon.com/demystifysci. For just 75 cents a week, you can ensure that this project continues to thrive and turns into far more than just two people in their living room talking to people over Zoom. There's another way that you can get involved in the project if you enjoy it, which is Paradigm Drift. We have a game show where we collect people's names all month long, and then when it is showtime and we pull names out of a hat, and those who are chosen get 60 seconds to present some idea that they have about how the world works. And if we really like your theory and we think that it's really got legs, we usually invite you back so that you can elaborate on the finer points of it.
Another thing, we are thinking about doing some sort of Q&A live stream on a semi-regular basis. We haven't picked a date for that yet. Maybe you guys want to drop some suggestions in the comments or a date and time, what day of the week works best for you or whatever that is. But we'd like to interact more with you folks. It's a little lonely being on one side of this mirror.
And in addition to our Patreon, we have a couple of other ways in which you can support the podcast. Obviously, you can like, comment, subscribe. YouTube has started doing something weird called hype points, which I feel sick to my stomach even saying out loud, but apparently you can hype an episode that you enjoy on the mobile app, and that translates somehow to it being shown to more people. I have no idea. This feels strangely like some kind of social currency, but if you do run across it, we would appreciate being hyped. We also have some merch that we're selling. We really don't want to sell stuff that is made by some faceless conglomerate. Presumably, there is some kind of merch out there in the world that we would feel comfortable making a sponsorship with. We have not found those people yet, but we do make hoodies. Shiloh and I each made a hoodie. The designs are for sale in the YouTube shelf. One's by Shiloh, one's by me, and so help support our small, quiet competition of who sells more hoodies. And then finally, before we get to the conversation with Brandon, there's one last way in which you can support us, which is you can purchase our record. We have a band called Secretary of Nature, and we just printed vinyl. It's called Everything Is So Good Here. And people have been saying that they don't actually know what our music sounds like, but when they hear it, they really enjoy it. And so to play us into our conversation with Brandon, here's a couple seconds off the record.
A crystal river shining through. Where now it's no, in darkness and shine. What the hell is digital currency, and how does Bitcoin fit into it, and where is the beginning of this big ball of thread?
Yeah, absolutely. So the beginning story here obviously is Bitcoin, but in order to understand where Bitcoin came from, why it was designed a certain way, we have to go back into prehistory or Bitcoin prehistory. And that starts in the 80s, the 90s, when the internet is really starting to emerge. And a group of people that we now call the Cipherpunks, think internet coders, libertarians, just fringe thinker theorists online, they saw the way the internet was trending and they described it as a coming digital panopticon. And if you don't know panopticon, it's a theoretical prison where you have asymmetry on the prison guard side, meaning picture a sphere or a circular building, and in the middle of that circular building, there's a courtyard and a giant tower. Theoretically, you could put one person in that tower and they can see into all jail cells around in that circular theoretical prison. And you could tint the windows and you could theoretically have no one in that tower, and yet the population is controlled by the illusion of being surveilled. So they envision the internet going that way, all messages tracked. Everything you do online leaves a digital footprint. Corporations, governments can slurp all that up, which they're doing now, obviously, and they can use that against the people. Right? The worst
Is
case
that
example.
because it kind of runs through this central point? Is that in the analogy that there's just some central spoke through which everything's distributed, and the government sits on top of that switchboard or whatever?
Metaphorically, yes, but you could look at it another way where you could put backdoors into your hardware to spy on you. All communication online is captured by sophisticated tools and stored somewhere. Then they can create giant databases. They know everything about you, and they can say, hey, Shiloh, I don't like your political point of view. We're going to turn off your passport. We're going to turn off your money. Right. And if this sounds crazy, look to China right now. This exists today.
No, I'm
They're building a
terrified about this. This is what terrifies me about digital currency in general. So I'm hoping you'll talk me out of that.
Absolutely. Um, anyway, so there's the panoptica. There's the fear of this early group, right? And so what came out of that was a mailing list and these sort of tinkerers trying to figure out solutions. They wanted digital privacy and they wanted a way to have money outside of state control. So those were kind of the two principles. If you want to go deeper here, I recommend looking up a Cipherpunks manifesto. It's a very short essay written in the 90s. And kind of the punchline is that cypherpunks write code. Okay, and what does that mean? So I think we have two options generally. You either vote harder, meaning you try to change the world through our existing political systems, or you build technological solutions that in a way make the fears of some sort of control obsolete. Right. So obviously cypherpunks, they don't vote harder, they write code. And that was kind of their philosophy. There's a bunch of cool names there: Tim May, Eric Hughes, Wei Dai, Nick Szabo, Hal Finney. And each one of those guys had different versions of trying to solve this problem of creating digital money that had inherent privacy and couldn't be stopped. However, each one of those different attempts failed. And so they failed due to a centralized issuer. So this new digital money becomes popular and the government knocks on the door and shuts it down. Do you have a question?
Yeah. I just want to clarify. So in my mind, before we start talking, I kind of thought of Bitcoin and digital currency all as the same concept. But it sounds like what you're saying is that the innovators of Bitcoin were reacting to a fear of government issued digital currency that would be used as a cudgel to get people to comply on some sort of social credit scoring system.
Well, so this is what's weird, right? Because, and this is the money that's in your bank account isn't real money, but it's also not a digital currency. Like you don't have gold sitting in your bank account. You have numbers on a ledger. And so there's a delicate balance when you say that something is digital currency versus Bitcoin versus the numbers on the ledger sheet at your
No, it's
bank.
a great point. It's all very confusing. Yeah. But it does fundamentally sound like he's saying that Bitcoin was innovated as a response to the looming threat of the future, which was that these people very early on perceived that commerce would be done online in the future and that the government could use that against you somehow.
Yeah, this is something that we've been thinking about kind of in terms of the dot-com bust of the 90s, where it seems like what happened is that there was a huge amount of investment into corporations that promised that all commerce was going to happen on the internet. But the problem was is that the framework for that didn't really exist yet, and so it was empty promises where they couldn't actually spool up their products fast enough to deliver on what they promised. And it's not that they've sold a false dream, because we live in a world right now where everything is online and nobody really uses cash for anything and everything is digital. They just promised that it would arrive 2 decades before it actually did. And so these guys, these cypherpunks, are they the product of this environment where they're looking at the dot-com boom and the internet boom and they're realizing that everything is inexorably marching towards this centralized online world where everything moves online? Like they're the, what is it, the like the snow crash cyberpunks that really see the fact that everything is just going to fade into this metaverse rather than remaining in meat space?
Yeah, I don't know if they had particular opinions on Stevenson's view of metaverse or otherwise. They just saw the obvious world that we are going to go online, commerce would be online, and the way the internet is structured is you can put people in between those data packets to intercept all the information. And if you look through history, governments will use whatever tools they can to control their population. And it's in their best interest to. Maybe you can even argue sometimes that's a good thing. But these folks had an ideological position that if we allow that system to fully emerge, then we will have no digital privacy. And if you have no digital privacy, you don't really have free speech. And if money's online, you don't really have your ability to spend your money in the way you want, which is an extension of free speech. And so they saw a world where we would all be trapped in this digital panopticon, and that would erode freedoms, that would erode liberties. And if we don't have the ability to speak our mind, we don't really have anything like a democracy. And so it sort of erodes the things that make Western civilization useful and successful. And so they tried all these different things to try and get out from under that. And you brought up dollars today, right? Dollars today are digital representations on in our bank accounts. They're just ones and zeros on a bank ledger. And some people might say, well, what's the difference with Bitcoin? And there's many differences. One is that dollars, unless you have physical cash in your hand, in which case you can go pay whoever you want, and as long as you're not on a camera, it's relatively private. But physical cash today makes up less than 1% of the outstanding dollars. And if you see the trends around the world, fewer and fewer places are accepting paper currency. And I would say we have 10 years left max until, I don't know, maybe 10% of countries still have it, right? Any sophisticated country is trying to phase it out. And so I think that's the way we're going. And where Bitcoin's different is that I can send a transaction peer to peer. There's 0 people in the middle of this transaction. No one can stop it.
We're getting ahead of ourselves. I think that I think that there is, I think that this is important, but we haven't even gotten to the point where we've laid out what Bitcoin is yet. Right, so at this point, we're just at the cypherpunks that are like,
we're
hey
establishing
man,
their motivation. Like they're seeing this fever dream of what's to come, and they're trying to address the issue in advance. And it seems like it's a really difficult challenge, right? That's kind of where we left off in this story.
Yeah, because they don't have a conventional, in terms of what people think of when they think of digital currencies, which is all these like meme coins and bitcoins and everything else. Like they don't have any of this yet. They're seeing that commerce will become digital, but the notion of
how to create a peer-to-peer coin hasn't happened yet. So I guess that's where we're at in the story.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's where we're at. And the first one that came out that was well known is called DigiCash. That was created in '89. So this is way before any sort of tech stock bubble in the '90s. And this was an anonymous way to send money around. However, it failed because the way the technology was set up, there was a centralized issuer. So the company created the coin and allowed people to use it privately. However, they still had God mode over the system. And so you can't really trust the system if a company has God mode. And a government, if this currency ever became successful, would just go to the corporation and say, hey, turn it off. right? So a very important lesson was learned there. A centralized issuer will not work.
Did somebody actually go to Digicoin and tell them to turn it off, or was that just something that emerged from watching it operate?
I think that one failed on its own merit without government intervention. I don't think it ever got scale enough to make it concerning. But there was another coin, I'm blanking on the name, but the idea was I have a warehouse of gold and I issue digital certificates of that gold. So you each own one gold bar. And if you say, I want to sell my gold bar, great. You sell it and I just update my ledger. The gold never moves. This became popular enough. I think it was called e-gold. And the government came with men with guns, knocked on the door and shut it down. Right. And you don't even have to look at the digital currency failures to know that this is true. The root cause of all currencies is that same issue of centralized control. If you look out throughout history, let's say our currency is functioning fine, and then the horde next door, the barbarians are at the gate, they're coming to knock down the door. That's an existential crisis. So you will print as much currency or do whatever you can. You'll spend the future and pull that forward today in order to get out of trouble, which then erodes the purchasing power of the currency. And so essentially, centralized control, you must trust the centralized issuer, and history is littered with examples of that trust being broken. And I'm also paraphrasing a Satoshi quote. He put that in the white paper.
We don't know who Satoshi is yet, although we kind of do, but we haven't
That's
talked about him yet.
He's the man on the hat.
It is the man on the hat. I figured I would be thematic today.
So is there a contest to solve this problem?
I just want to say that the first solution, this e-gold solution, like that's just reinventing a bank. Like that's what a bank does. The bank has the gold and it issues the certificates and it just holds on to it. And I think that the reason that men with guns show up is because the government's like, no, we do banks. Right?
Absolutely correct. Yeah. And we all know that the currency is not backed by gold anymore. Starting in 1945, we created the Bretton Woods system, which was dollars are backed by gold. So you can trust dollars because they're as good as gold. And then by 71, we're dealing with the Vietnam War. We're spending too much money. European countries who also house their gold in New York, they said, wait a minute, you're spending too much money. You're not going to be able to, you're spending too much money relative to the gold you have. So you're debasing the currency. And the European country said, hey, give me my money back. And they took warships to New York City. They took their gold. They started to take their gold. And then Nixon temporarily suspended the convertibility of gold. And so from 71 on, there is no gold backing whatsoever. This is just digital units on a computer somewhere, and they print them at will.
I will say that even when there was gold backing these claims, it was still double lent, and to some, I mean, not just double lent. Like you could have 10 chunks of gold in your bank, and you could lend them to multiple people at once. So the amount of money was never, even though like in one way of thinking about it, it corresponded to gold that was in the bank, it was still so over lent that, and those lendings were then repackaged and lent to other people. It's been a sort of house of cards for a very, very long time, as far as I can tell.
Yeah, there's different periods have different versions of how they do the money. And you're right? Initially, you start with just using metals as money. And then you realize that that's pretty inefficient. And I think it was in Holland, maybe 500 years ago, they created they had markets, right? You buy and trade goods. But it was so inconvenient to cut off little pieces of silver or copper or gold. So they created a system where you give us the metals and we give you certificates and you spend them in this little farmer's market, right? But your point is valid. Like over time, we trust that the gold's in the system. And in the beginning, you got a certificate for 1 ounce of gold and you leave and I could go get my gold whenever I want. But what do humans do? We get complacent. Time goes on. We stop redeeming for gold because it's inconvenient. And we just live with the paper receipts. And then after time goes on, they debase or they inflate the currency, the claims, higher than the gold that backs it. And that's absolutely right.
Well, it's interesting because you can back that with a lot of things. Like, it feels like I've thought this a lot, where as long as there's a universal faith in the fact that the currency will actually allow you to purchase something or fulfill some desire, it works. The thing that it falls apart during is when the reputation of the issuer becomes so shaky that nobody trusts that the issuer will be able to deliver. And so it doesn't really matter if there's gold, if there's an army that's capable of, I don't know, mining enough ore to be able to produce the things that can be sold on the world market in order to keep this thing going. It feels like money is in some way a hallucination that is a hallucination about the promise that someone is capable of delivering on something. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's mostly right. Let's talk about the trust, for example. And what you're talking about is being able to spend your money to buy something. You can use all different ways to do that. And that would be, from a monetary theory perspective, that would be considered the medium of exchange. It's what are you using to pay for something? But there are other properties of money that are very important. The most important one is storing value. So if I have some money today and I have a surplus from my wages above my expenses and I save that money for a rainy day, is that money going to be worth the same amount in purchasing power terms into the future? And with a precious metal based money, historically for thousands of years, that's more or less kept up. But if you look at our current system today, during the COVID era, we essentially doubled all outstanding dollars in the world. So it's 100-and-some-year-old currency. We inflate it slowly over time. Then you look at the chart, 71, it goes exponential. And during COVID, they printed something like 40% of all outstanding dollars. And you see grocery prices double. You see healthcare go up. You see all this rising costs. And that is a function of increasing the supply relative to our economic output. And so, medium of exchange, store value. The next point was, is it a hallucination? And in a way, that's 100% correct. There's no inherent value to a piece of paper, $100 bill, right? But we have this inner subjective consensus that that $100 bill is a $100 bill and it buys a certain amount of things. But if we're not careful, we might think that we can hallucinate anything into being money. However, that's not true. There are fundamental principles of what makes a money good and what makes a money not good. And the common principles would be things like durable. Okay, if you have an apple, we love apples, but if you set an apple on the counter for 2 weeks, you have a rotten apple, so it's not durable. Compare that to gold. Every single ounce of gold we've taken out of the ground is still perfectly informed today. It's perfectly durable. Okay, then you have divisibility. Gold coins, one gold coin might buy you a horse. I'm making this up. But what if I want to buy a chicken, right? It's worth way less than a horse. So I have to somehow cut this gold coin into small pieces, right? So it needs to be divisible. That's also why we had gold for large purchases, silver, and then copper for the peasants, more or less. Okay, then we have, durable, divisible, scarce, right? That comes back to you can't allow the monetary supply to inflate because then you essentially wreck commerce. So a common example is in Africa, the local tribes would use shells or beads or all different things that were attempting to find a medium that satisfied these monetary properties. In a tribe where you only have a limited amount of shells and it requires man-hour to work them into a cool necklace, that functions as a type of money for those folks. Okay, same with creating glass beads. You got to find the inputs. It's expensive to make. There's a term called unforgeable costliness that would describe this. Enter European colonialists. Oh, these tribes think glass beads are money. We can mass produce these. So they take their ships back to Europe. They come back with thousands and thousands of glass beads and they trade them and then they blow up the currency. Right? So scarcity is an important one. I'm blanking on the other two. I can Google those. But the point here is that not anything can be money. Even though we hallucinate it, There are things that serve as better money and worse money. And if you look out through time, humans essentially converged on gold. Number one, gold is relatively evenly distributed throughout the Earth's crust. So no matter where you are, you stick a shovel in the ground, you find some gold. And so over time, it emerged as the best money because of scarcity, divisibility, portability. That's another one. You wouldn't want to use like mountains as gold or tree trunks as gold. You can't really move them around. And so gold was money for thousands of years. And then eventually we issued paper receipts against those gold and slowly came off a precious metal system. And now we're living in the fiat system, which means by decree, which means no backing.
And so, oh, go ahead, Shay.
Well, I just felt like commenting on the fact that most of the economists we've talked to so far from this modern monetary background, and their argument is essentially that you can just print as much money as you want as long as people stay employed. Like that's what it comes down to for them. They're like, the tax base doesn't really have anything to do with the money that is being spent by the government. They really just tax you to make sure that you stay in the program, essentially, that you keep working, essentially. And as long as everybody's working, then the ship just keeps cruising on and on and on. And we're going to have a debate with an MMT guy versus a standard Austrian guy. And that's going to be really interesting because we've been having a hard time finding anybody to push back on that. I mean, they rationalize it so well. You should listen to these guys. Like it's hard for us just being two, random people who don't have any kind of economic training to push back on this line of thinking other than that seems weird. And it seems like I can't buy anything anymore. And it seems like my parents were doing much better at my age for working less hours. And
I think that there's a really, really discrete thing that modern monetary theory says very quietly in the background that they mean that they don't actually express fully, which is the fact that you can print as much money as you want as long as what you're doing is building infrastructure and useful things that the money is going to pay for, that the system is relatively uncorrupt, and that you are using resources that are internal. You're not having to buy the resources from China or from a different country who may one day say that they don't want to take the currency. And so I think that modern monetary theory in a non-global world actually works pretty well, where you can print as much money as you want, but it doesn't work very well in a global world where you're trying to exchange dollars across borders and countries might be like, well, maybe I don't want your dollars anymore. And that's the place where it starts to sort of fall apart, I think.
so can we circle this back to the history lesson that we're getting to in that
Yeah.
we've reached this point. We're looking at what qualifies as money. This fiat currency becomes the norm. Obviously, we talked about we're trending towards the fiat not even having a physical basis anymore, which is the nightmare of these cypherpunks, essentially, that now that it's just numbers on a ledger somewhere, it can be used to silence you if you're a disruptive person or whatever. And that's really terrifying because the whole basis of the constitution of our country is that you have to be able to protest against things going sideways. And if there's easy tools to silence you, then that's not good.
That's right. And before we go there, can I comment on MMT?
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm familiar with Stephanie Kelton. I observe the MMT crowd. I'm familiar with their arguments, and I'll throw them one bone, which is that their arguments up till now have held true. We're printing money like drunken sailors. The debt's insane. Interest on our debt, on our government debt, is now more than defense. Not paying back the debt, simply the interest on our debt is now the third biggest line item in our government's budget. And this is accelerating exponentially. So there is a problem looming. That's me foreshadowing the unraveling of MMT. Okay. So they believe that we can just print the money. It's money we owe ourselves. So what they mean is the Treasury Department issues new government debt, a 10-year debt, a 30-year note, a 1-year note, right? And who buys that? Historically, other countries buy our debt because US treasuries trade very liquid. They're essentially a dollar but they have a kicker because you get paid interest. So we flooded the globe with US government debt for decades and decades and decades. Okay, now back to that debt problem. If we continue to print too much money, the value of the dollar goes down, and other countries start to say, "Wait a minute, this is just like 1971. You're printing too much currency. How can we trust U.S. Treasuries? How can we trust your debt now?" And if we pay 5% interest on a 10-year note, and inflation is 10% over that per year over that 10-year period, they're losing a lot of money. So the net effect here is that countries lose trust in us buying them buying our debt. They stop buying it, which means we have to buy it as a country. And when the US government buys the debt, that accelerates inflation. And so this is a system that feeds on itself, and ultimately no one wants our debt.
I have a
And
question.
that's how a currency breaks.
Why do we need somebody to buy the debt? Like, why do we, if the Treasury can just print dollar bills, like, why do we need to have this artifice of, okay, well, we have this debt that we've generated, and there's some interest that you're going to get off of it. It just seems, and I know that this is a naive question, but why do we have to do this dance of like, oh, well, we're going to pay you back if you buy this, as opposed to just printing the money and using it and just moving on with our lives?
Yeah, if the market buys our debt, then inflation is under control, essentially. If no one wants to buy our debt, we're just printing money into thin air, and then the amount of money in the system increases relative to the amount of goods and services we want. So it just makes inflation go crazy. And over a short period of time, you can survive that. But over a long period of time, you can go look at other countries who hyperinflate their currency, and the list is endless. You go look at Argentina, every generation they have a new currency. Imagine your parents and all the money they saved, and all of a sudden everything your family saved is gone in 3 months. And imagine doing that every generation, right? And so we're obviously not Argentina, we're not Zimbabwe, we're not these other countries. And a large source of the US government's power is because the world buys our debt. And it's not only propping up our currency, it also gives us power to be the world police abroad. We don't like what you're doing, Russia. We're seizing all the US treasuries that you own. And that's what we did during COVID and during the Russia-Ukraine thing. And what that leads to is non-aligned nations say, I don't want anything to do with the US, we're going to build our own system. And China hasn't been buying our debt for about 20 years. Russia's not buying it, Japan's not buying it, Brazil, all the BRICS countries aren't buying it. And so the global demand for US treasuries keeps going down, which makes our inflation go up. And that's where MMT doesn't work. And so it's a very cute concept that's hard to falsify. But if you know anything about history, there is an end here, and it doesn't end well.
Interesting and terrifying. All right, that helps. We'll try that on when we get to the debate next month. It's going to be epic. All right, so back to the history. So folks are perceiving all of this. They see the changes that are happening, the fiat currency, the disappearance of the physical tender, and there seems to be this contest going on in the background for who can solve this problem amongst the underground nerds.
That's right. And so enter Satoshi, right? In the wake of the 2008 financial crisis, some anonymous figure, or I guess pseudonymous, Satoshi Nakamoto, published a white paper. Here's a 9-page white paper. He posted it to the mailing list. All those nerds start talking about it. It's all available now, by the way, so you can go back and look at this stuff. And that was in October of 2008. A few months later, January 2009, Satoshi releases the network. He releases the software, and people on this mailing list start running the software themselves. So now all of a sudden we have a network.
Pardon the interruption, but I have to ask you for a favor. If you are listening to this conversation and you are enjoying it, then come over to patreon.com/demystifysci. For 75 cents a week, you can help us power this ship to become something that is far greater than just a Zoom podcast. We'll see you there.
And what's interesting about Bitcoin, people think it's the first, and they say, oh, just like MySpace, the first one gets out competed by Facebook and then TikTok and then whatever. And I should probably save that one for later, but we're too late. Money is different. Money is a network good. The more that people use your money, the more valuable it becomes. And monetary properties matter, divisibility, scarcity, etc. So if you look at the network effects and you look at the essentially perfectly engineered money, what do we know about all monetary theory? How can we engineer a perfect money? We learned from gold, we learned from fiat money. And Satoshi took little bits and pieces from his peers in the cypherpunk movement, and he bolted them all together in this Frankenstein type way to create a novel thing. And what emerges out of that novel creation are the properties we like. No one can stop you. It's peer-to-peer. The currency can't be debased. There's 21 million units. They'll never change, right? You have to have a consensus with the network. So it's this weird hybrid between like extreme capitalism and extreme socialism. Like if you think of the horseshoe theory, those things are just almost touching because everyone runs the network, but no one's in control of the network. So it creates all these really nice, warm and fuzzy things that appeal to people on any side of the political spectrum. And
does Satoshi have a backdoor to this thing?
Good question. So it's open source software. Anyone can run it, anyone can review it. And we've had thousands and thousands of the smartest people on the planet trying to figure out weaknesses. And you might say, well, they'll find one later, like we can't be sure. And of course that's true. However, Bitcoin's worth $2 trillion today. That is a large honeypot. If you could find a way to steal Satoshi's coins or have a backdoor, that probably would have been executed by now. And Satoshi's later disappeared. He was around for like 3 years, active in the mailing list, doing his thing. The CIA said, hey, Satoshi, come into our offices. We want to learn about this thing. And Satoshi says, no, man, I'm out. I'm not doing that. And then like 48 hours later, Satoshi disappeared. Never heard from him since.
Oh, no.
And then you might say, well, what if Satoshi comes back? Is he going to have an influence over the network? What if the CIA created Bitcoin? Entirely possible. Let me give you the original lab leak. So cryptographers inside the CIA, they invented all kinds of the internet tech that we have today. They created the internet. They created cryptography. They created SHA-256, which is what the cryptography Bitcoin uses. What if some morally conflicted CIA cryptographer somehow came up with this? And he's like, oh, wow, this might actually work. And I need to release this into the wild because I know my boss isn't going to like it. He releases a paper, disappears, right? So what if the CIA created it? Is that bad for Bitcoin? The answer is no, because again, it's open source software. It's reviewed by millions of people around the world, and no one has an advantage over the network.
Bitcoin doesn't mean that it's open source. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say, I don't think that's likely because I don't think there's any morally conflicted CIA officers in existence.
Might have been one.
What does it mean that Bitcoin's a piece of software?
Yeah, so the software that runs Bitcoin is just a bunch of code. You can go download it anywhere you want on the internet. And that code essentially has the rules of the network embedded into it. And as a person who just wants to buy it from Coinbase or something like that, you're never touching the software. You have nothing to do with it. But if you want to be a miner, which is a whole topic we should probably save for when we're ready for it. If you want to run a node, right, there's 30,000 nodes around the world. Those nodes connect peer-to-peer. And if I send a transaction, like I could send you some Bitcoin from my phone right now, my Bitcoin will go through the internet, leave my phone. It will find, through the internet, it will find the first node next to me, let's say the one sitting upstairs. Then my node says, based on the rules, does Brandon's Bitcoin transaction follow the rules? If the answer is yes, then my node relays it to 6 other nodes. Those nodes check the rules, and then they relay it to 6 more. And in like 50 milliseconds, my transaction's across the whole globe, assuming it followed the rules. Now, if I tried to construct a Bitcoin transaction that spent the same 1 Bitcoin to both of you at the same time, double spending, the rules of my node and everyone else's node will say, wait a minute, you can't double spend. This transaction's invalid. I will not relay it to the next participant. Transaction goes nowhere.
And so nobody's been able to figure out how to double spend yet.
Correct. And that is the fundamental computer science problem that Satoshi solved, stopping the double spend problem. And
That's
in
really cool.
cryptography terms, this is the Byzantine generals problem. We talked about this briefly in our pre-show, but essentially 4 generals are trying to sack some castle, right? And if they all attack at the same time, they can overwhelm and win. But if they don't attack at the same time, they all lose. So how do you synchronize multiple people together and form consensus? That's ultimately what he solved. And the fatal flaw of digital money and digital anything is the ability to create digital scarcity. If I copy a JPEG of my 3-year-old son and I send you the picture, I didn't send you the picture. I sent you a copy of the picture. I still maintain it. So digital scarcity is a very hard problem. And that's actually what Satoshi created. There's 21 million Bitcoin. There'll never be any more. And they cannot be double spent because the network prevents that.
Why did he pick that number? Is there some numerology embedded in this?
It's a good question. No one knows is the answer. You can create theory based on what Satoshi said. And he's a mythological figure in a way. He is like, is it... Who stole fire from the gods? Do you remember in the Greeks?
Wasn't it
Prometheus.
Prometheus?
Yes.
Prometheus, yeah.
Thank you. So Prometheus, like a demigod, he stole fire from the gods. He's like, hey, this is pretty cool. The humans should have it. So he stole fire, gave it to the people, and he was punished forever because of that. You can look at Satoshi as a Promethean-like figure, taking money out of the control of anyone who might control money, typically governments, and giving it to the people. And Satoshi was pseudonymous so that he didn't suffer the same fate as Prometheus. He might be dead, he might be in jail, he might be at the Bitcoin conference shaking everyone's hands. We don't know, but so far he escaped.
I can see the appeal. And gosh, it has this whole mythology and lore associated with it. Before we move on, I wanna understand the climate when Satoshi shows up. Were there other people who tried out different versions of this that didn't work out? Like, were there must have been a number of attempts. Like, you mentioned some of these more central bank type operations, but were people, and then you mentioned that Satoshi was bolting together a bunch of people's ideas. What were some of those ideas and how did they show up?
Yeah, definitely. So my favorite one is BitGold. And BitGold was launched in 1998 by Nick Szabo, who's still active in the world now. And BitGold never was released. It was just a theoretical version of how this could look. But what he created was a proof of work chain. And what this means is, actually, we got to go back to email spam to understand this. So in the early email days, if you had an email address, anyone could spam you and send whatever they wanted to you. Okay, over SMTP, Simple Transfer Mail Protocol. Then you have something like, let's say Gmail. How do you prevent email spam? You create a cost to send the email. The cost can be 1/1,000,000th of a penny, doesn't matter what it is. But if you induce a cost, the would-be spammer now has to pay a lot of money to deliver his spam. So the way he created that digital stamp, it's like a stamp on your letter, is by making your computer do some sort of calculation. That computer calculation has an energy cost and it deters spammers, right? So you spend real world resources in order to do something digital. That's the bridge between the physical and the digital. That's fundamental to how Bitcoins are issued. That's fundamental to the mining process. That's fundamental to a whole bunch of stuff. That's admittedly extremely complex. We can go as deep there as you want. But okay, so we have this digital stamp that prevents spam. And Nick Szabo said, wait a minute, why don't we reuse those same proofs of work? My computer did work in order to do something digitally. What if we use that to back the money? Okay, that's a fundamental one. And let's see, what else? B Money by Wei Dai, they had the idea that the money was a decentralized ledger. A Google Sheets shared across the world where we all have the ledger, right? And then you have things like Napster or BitTorrent, right? That's an interesting case study. Napster, there's a centralized party that facilitates everything. Fantastic product. Okay, easy to shut down. And what comes out of that? BitTorrent. BitTorrent is peer-to-peer file sharing. I only give you a fraction of the file. You guys contribute a fraction. And guess what? BitTorrent is alive and well. The only reason why BitTorrent's not more popular now is because the digital media ecosystem we're in makes streaming cheap and convenient. So people stopped having to pirate at scale because it's $10 a month for your Netflix. Let's move on. Let's
Was
see.
Satoshi hanging around in the chats and stuff throughout all of this and commenting and,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, there's hundreds of his messages in the early forum on bitcointalk.org. You can go read all these. People have created books to take all his lessons in one consumable package, and also on the Cypherpunk mailing list. That's all public now too.
That's so
So
fascinating. So it seems like he was a real person. I mean, at least it's very convincing that there was a person who was soaking up all these ideas and packaging them into one master plan.
oh
Doesn't
yeah.
he have a Bitcoin? Doesn't he have an exchange account with like $2 trillion of Bitcoin in it?
So Bitcoin itself is worth like 2 or 2.5 trillion.
I see.
People estimate Satoshi has between 500,000 and 1 million coins in his wallets. It's not exactly known. You can say like in the first day of Bitcoin, all the Bitcoin issued that day, Satoshi for sure has. But as you go out through time, it's a little bit harder to say what Satoshi had or what someone else had. It's not really knowable, but that's the range that most people accept.
Yeah. So can you? I don't understand how this works yet. So the day that it starts, you're saying Satoshi has a certain amount, and you're saying that there's a cap on the amount that exists in the universe which can be mined. And we kind of touched on mining a little bit. But what happened on that day one? Did he just throw coins out to people, to his buddies? Like, what happened exactly? I don't totally get it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So that brings us to what the blockchain actually is, and then also how currency or how coins are issued into the market. So to keep it the super high level is roughly every 10 minutes, a new block is created, and a block just means what transactions took place in the 10 minutes prior. All the nodes look at them and they say, these are good transactions. Now you have a bundle of transactions, let's say 100 transactions. And the block, one block is just a timestamp saying these 100 transactions are valid. They occurred. They're now on this shared ledger that all the nodes have. And 10 minutes later, whatever transaction's the next one. And those blocks are linked cryptographically and they go in order. And you can say these transactions occurred after these other transactions with some fancy math linking them. And then where do these coins come from? So the miners, their role in the network is to do the accounting and the security. So they say, these coins moved and they're all valid. Good. They get paid for their service in the form of new coins being issued.
So they do the computational work of checking these transactions.
Yes, they check that, which is very small amount of computational work, and then they have to do something else, which is spending energy. So they buy fancy computers. Those fancy computers, they literally guess a random number as fast as they can. That's it. So we have millions of these machines guessing random numbers, and they
there's like a cryptographic. So there's a hash, which is basically in encryption. If you take some number and you put it through this algorithm, you'll get this much longer, much more complicated.
Yeah.
Like basically scramble of the original number.
Yeah.
And so I think that the way that I understand it is that like the hash is issued and then each miner has to figure out what is the number that went into the encryption algorithm that produced this hash. Is that correct?
But is the whole point just that it's hard to do?
It computationally expensive.
So this is just mimicking how difficult it is to get gold out of the ground or something? That's it.
Amazing. Yes, that's it. And on the hash part, so the reason why you have a hash here we used SHA-256. You're right. You put one number into the hash function and out creates another number. And the way it's set up is it's very easy to verify that that number going in produces the end result. You can just rerun it. But it's impossible to go backwards through that hash function to derive the starting number. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
And why that matters is because block 1 and block 2, okay, block 1's live, 100 transactions in the network. Now, all the other transactions occur. They're sitting in a block waiting to be added to the network, and they're guessing their magic number. I'll get to that in a second. But part of that block, the way you can construct it to follow the rules is you have to take a data point from the first block, run it through the hash function so that you know with 100% certainty that this second block occurred after block 1, and block 1 had ledger updates. So the fact that you link the two mean that you can't double spend, right? And in the early days, 50
Can you put that in your own words?
Bitcoin.
Hold on, that seems really, really important, and it kind of washed over me.
Well, I think that what Brandon is saying is he's like, okay, so the blocks, one of the ways in which you prevent double spending is that you're keeping track of the order in which transactions happen. And if you can, and you need a method of being able to say that this transaction happened after the previous block of transactions. And so something that I'm missing is, does each transaction inside of that block require a novel hash, like decipherment? Like, does each one have a unique? Okay, so basically, because each piece, so like if there's 100 transactions, each one of those 100 transactions has found a number that when it is encrypted gives this hash, right? And so he's saying that that's a very simple transaction to do. You take the number, you put it through the SHA-256, you get the hashed result. And you, if you're trying to put together a new block, now say, okay, I've gone back
backwards on it now?
No, you're like, I've gone back to the previous block, picked one of those raw numbers, not encrypted numbers, run it through the algorithm, and I've basically added it as a tag to my block to show that this number has already been guessed. It begins the signature that I'm sending, and then after that signature of the previous block, I have everything that I'm putting down. Is that reasonable?
Yep. Yeah, that's right. And all it really establishes is time. Okay, this gets very esoteric. I'll try to keep it simple. Each block is like a tick on the clock. Okay, there's no time in between blocks. Transactions are happening, but they're not real until you link transaction set block 2 to the first one. And that is the new ledger. The whole who owns what gets updated right there, and it establishes an order of time. You can think about a world where, what if you could go back 10 blocks and double spend those coins? Then all of a sudden, every block after that is corrupted. The network's messed up. And so that's where the real energy cost comes in. It's expensive to go back in time because in order to be the miner and to win the block, right? They're all the miners are all competing to add block 2 to block 1. They do that by guessing random numbers. And okay, it costs computing resources to do that. And we're all competing, right? So it's like the sum total of all computational hash power. Go ahead.
Isn't there something about the nature of the hash function, which is that there are multiple numbers that will give you the same hash? Like, isn't that like, because if we're talking about the fact, it's the opposite.
One number can, okay, you put in a JPEG, it goes through SHA-256, you get an output. That output is only from that input. You can never create that same output from two different inputs.
But isn't there some feature of this that is like double count, that does have multiplicity of inputs, or no? Am I totally imagining that?
I'm not aware.
Okay.
Could be. I would say to get this stuff in perfect granularity, you'd want a cryptographer.
I guess
I still feel pretty stupid though, but that's okay. I'm good at other stuff. All right, so I feel like
there's a piece of this story that we haven't solved yet.
There's these blocks getting at it. I get that. I get that people are doing a computationally intense process to add the blocks. They're competing for the ability to add the blocks.
Yep.
Adding the blocks validates the transactions that have occurred recently or
Yep.
locally or whatever.
I don't totally understand that part. I feel like this is how every conversation I've had about Bitcoin has gone, where I get to this point and I'm like, I don't get it.
What I would say here to let you both off the hook and me for not explaining it better is that, do you know how your car works? Do you know how fiat money works? But we still use them, right?
Well,
And
I mean, I don't like that. I want to be able to understand, because if I had somebody on who was explaining to me how engines worked, and I was like, hold on a second, can you explain to me how the engine works? And they're like, look, we don't need to know how the engine works. We all use cars. I'd be like,
I think
I
we're
don't
really
know.
close to getting it.
Yeah.
I think that I have those broad strokes. The only piece of the puzzle that I'm missing in my own mind is this hash solving, how this hash solving mining process relates to the actual transaction security inside of the block that's about to come online. It seems like it relates to it somehow, and I feel like I've missed that link. That's the only piece of the puzzle I'm missing, I think.
yeah, let's go back to unforgeable costliness. Okay, remember those glass beads. If you're in a tribe, they're unforgeably costly. They're expensive to produce in the local environment, but if I have a manufacturing facility for glass beads, they're now not costly anymore. I can forge them very quickly, right? And with Bitcoin, how do you amend the ledger of who owns what? The only way to do that is through the miners spending real world resources. So what it means is it's very expensive to try to cheat.
And they're
And
basically all trying to cheat, is what they're kind of doing. Is that like they're trying to solve some unique piece of one of these transactions inside of the up and coming block.
okay, I think there's a confusion. So
Yeah.
the mining, the random guessing that the miners do,
Yeah,
that has zero real world impact. The
I
math
see.
doesn't matter at all.
It doesn't relate to any of those transactions or anything.
Totally irrelevant. It's just it's an auction in economic terms.
Yeah.
And what it means is, let's say there's 100 miners around the world and they each are mining with 1% of the network. Okay. Then what that would mean is that since they're all guessing the random number game, that means if there's 100 and they each own 1%, each miner would roughly earn one block out of every 100. So they get paid because they've solved the random number 1% of the time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think I understand how these blocks come online and how people are competing and they're difficult and people are rewarded for doing them. My question is, how does what's the creation of the block moment? Do you know what I mean? Like, what makes it valid? What
Good question.
turns a bunch of transactions into a block?
Okay, so I'm the miner who we're all guessing magic random numbers. My machine guessed it.
I love that Brandon's explaining this to us like we're kind of like slow 8-year-olds.
We kind of are.
It's complex. This is a never-ending rabbit hole. Like this table stakes here are people spend a decade, 10 hours a day, and they don't consider themselves experts here. It touches everything. It's weird. It's novel, and so it collects people who fall down rabbit holes.
It's all good. I feel like I'm closer than ever before.
I appreciate that. I do as well.
Just let the man speak.
You're super close. So my node guesses or my mining machine guesses the magic number. So that's part one of what's required to create a block. The next thing is all transactions in the block must be valid under the rules of the network. The third thing is I must have a hash link to the block prior. So it establishes a series of time. It establishes all transactions are valid. And I guess the magic number, the proof of work number, which allows me to add to the blockchain.
So that's the connectivity. That's like the piece that connects you to the previous.
Exactly. And the second I find that magic number, my mining machine relays that out to all of the other nodes in the network. And the second they see that those three conditions are met, they add it to the blockchain.
Got it. And now say there's something sketchy on there. Do I discover that in my mining process, or does that discovered as soon as it's being tried to be connected to the nodes around it?
Yeah, so software runs the mining. And so they would construct software that says only combine valid transactions. But there's nothing that says they couldn't, right? A miner could try to double spend, but the other nodes would catch it and that block would never get added to the network. So they're just dumping money down the drain running these miners. And most of the cost is in energy. There's a capex component on the machines, but energy is where the real advantage comes from.
Like literally electrons, like you're like
Oh yeah,
power, like burning coal or something. Okay.
it's
Yeah.
the most renewable energy industry on our planet.
Like in the sense that everybody's putting up solar panels and wind turbines?
Yeah, like if you look at any large industry, the energy mix for Bitcoin is most favorable for people who prefer renewable energy.
One question I have though that immediately pops up is all of this is going to end one day, right? If there's only 21 or if there's a finite unit of these Bitcoins, they're going to all be mined eventually, right?
Absolutely, good question. So roughly 20 million are already issued.
Whoa.
So
And there's
it's
only
almost over.
21 million of them.
So for the math nerds, the issuance is cut in half every 4 years. So in the first 4 years of Bitcoin's life, 50% of the coins were issued. The next 4 years, 50% of the remaining coins were issued. So you go from 10 and a half and you add another five and whatever. And now we're at 20 million.
Satoshi got Zeno's paradox into the protocol. Right? What's that?
I'm unfamiliar. What is that?
Zeno's paradox is that if you have some distance to cross and each step that you take, you can only cover half the remaining distance. You never actually make it to the end point because as you approach the end, you take progressively smaller and smaller steps.
Bingo. That's exactly how the issuance set up. And it goes until 2140. And due to some weird anomaly in the code, there will never actually be 21 million. It's like 20.9999999. And so, very similar to your paradox, we never technically reached 21 million. But your question, the heart of it, what happens? Does this thing end? The answer is no. These 21 million are infinitely divisible. So I can send you 1/1 millionth of a Bitcoin right now, a couple pennies or whatever that's worth.
But the mining ends.
Good question. No. So the mining, I forgot to mention this. There's two revenue streams for the miners. Number one, they get the newly issued coins, which they can save or spend, whatever they want to do. And they get all the transaction fees that were associated with the transactions in that block. And so as Bitcoin becomes more popular, the reward of the new coins, it goes down in Bitcoin terms, but so far it's gone up in dollar terms. That's important because they pay their energy costs in dollars. But yeah, as soon as the subsidy is gone, their only revenue stream is from the transaction fees. And they also are starting to get revenue from energy production. So in energy terms, ancillary services. There's other miners who repurpose heat. So miners, it's just that guess, right? And the miners are essentially space heaters. They're expensive space heaters.
I had kind of a question I asked. I'm not sure I got a straight answer on it. So the day that Satoshi opens this thing up, he sets in place the system by which the mines. Oh, he opens the mines, let's say, but he also starts off with some cash himself or some Bitcoin, right? And does he give it to his buddies? Does he just start throwing coins around? And like how does what does the landscape look like on day one?
Great question. So the second the network launches, in that first block, Satoshi is the only one mining. So he gets that first block of 50 coins. 10 minutes later, he probably got the second 50 block. And now he's trying to convince the people on the network to join him. And for the first 2 years, I think, there was no Bitcoin price. There was no way no one priced it. It didn't have a value. It was just an internet curiosity that these nerds played with. And then Satoshi starts sending Bitcoin to his friends, trying to get them involved, right? So he bootstraps a network through force of will in the early days, which is also why he has so many of the early coins, because there's not a lot of people mining.
Was he doing? But there was no real transaction. Like the transactions were just toy transactions, or
they're all
were there
valid.
services? Were
They
there
just didn't have
services
a
being
price.
rendered? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You could go online and people would say like, here, I'll give you 1,000 Bitcoins for $5. Like people were doing that at random times, but they didn't have a market price. It's just, hey, do you want this weird internet coin to play around with?
But so when Satoshi is mining the first Bitcoins, and we
Mm.
talk about the creation of the block, and the block has these all the transaction that happened for the last 10 minutes. There's no transactions in the first block, right? It's just empty.
Good question.
Yeah, and that's okay. There's nothing to add to the ledger, but you solved the block, so you get the issuance.
Okay, and so at this point, the network has tons of transactions on it, and basically every single miner has some. Do you need to have some kind of local drive where you store the ledger that's constantly
Yes.
getting updated? Okay. And so everybody's basically storing this set of transactions, and they know that the last block was issued, at 9 a.m. It is now 9:10. One of them figures out the correct magic number,
Yep.
packages the entire block, sends that out, and so now this doesn't necessarily waste the effort of all of the other miners because they're still trying to guess the next magic number, and it doesn't really matter, right?
Yeah, the second that block is found and added to the ledger, all of the other miners instantly try and find the next block.
And is there some kind of is there a different there's a different hash that's associated with the next block. So the effort is lost when somebody it's a competition.
lost.
Okay.
Correct. Which
Mm-hmm.
simulates the real cost of mining gold, right?
Like
And
when somebody finds something you haven't.
well, think about this. If gold's $4,000 an ounce right now, at $4,000 an ounce, I'm going to go out there and find some gold because my efforts are worth it, right? But if you could just magically create new gold without having big trucks and digging holes and refining it, we would just inflate the supply of gold to infinity and then gold would break.
Mm. And is there something about the system that, other than the date where mining stops, that limits the supply?
In the code, you just issue 0 Bitcoins when you create a new block at 2140.
Interesting. Okay. I don't know. I think that I have a pretty solid sense of how all of this works.
Yeah, I think we got the basics. Maybe we should take a little break, and when we come back, we should look at my horror dreams about what could go wrong, because I have some concerns and I've seen some nightmare stuff go down. And also, I want to hear about your ecological theory of money as it relates to everything we've talked about so far.
The organism that we're growing inside of all these mining machines.
Yes, please. Yeah, that sounds like a great plan.
This concludes part one of our conversation with Brandon. We are going to dive into some of the perils associated with Bitcoin in the next episode, although Brandon does end up soothing us about many of these, and we will examine a potential analog in biology for this technology, which is unfolding in real time around us.
See you next time.